I'm sure you're all wondering, hey, Tooterp, why do you have a scraggly, poorly kept beard? Well, my razor broke, but hey, why are you interrogating me when you clicked on a Punch-Out video, for goodness sake? But this isn't just any old Punch-Out video. In this video, I'm going to be telling you guys why Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is one of the best, if not the best, sports video game of all time. But chess doesn't count though, by the way. At some point between the years of 1986 and 1987, a man named Ginyo Takeda was in the middle of working on an NES game called Punch-Out when he decided to check out a real-life boxing match. The boxing match he attended happened to be one of Mike Tyson's, and like most people, Takeda was impressed by Mike Tyson's powerful punches and aura. Takeda decided that Mike Tyson would be the perfect final boss for Punch-Out, not only because Mike Tyson seemed to be invincible at the time, but also because it would make the game perform better in the United States. And that it did. On September 18th of 1987, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out for the NES finally released, and boxing video games hit their peak. The character you play as is named Little Mac as opposed to the Big Macs you get from McDonald's, and you have a trainer named Doc Lewis. Other than the funny quotes in between rounds and a love for chocolate, there isn't much information about him, but I mean, this is an NES game about boxing. But despite that, it is confirmed that he is an ex-heavyweight world champion, which is pretty cool. Of course, the NES game was based on the previous arcade release, but I mean, come on, look at that thing. There ain't no way that's running on an NES, are you joking? So Ginyo Takeda and the development team behind Mike Tyson's Punch-Out had to make the game from the ground up. Since the NES controller only has two buttons, a D-pad, select and start, the game of course isn't very complicated. The A button punches with Little Mac's left hand, while the B button punches with the right. You can also hold up on the D-pad to aim for the head, unlike Thor. And you can also press down on the D-pad to block any incoming attacks, though it only helps a little bit. Like, you're still getting beat up. If you actually want to stand a chance against a professional boxer trying to hurt you, you're gonna need to dodge his attacks, which you can do with left and right on the D-pad. There are also these things called star punches, which are basically super punches. Every now and then, your opponent will have some special vulnerability frames where if you punch them at the perfect timing, you get 1 star. To use the star punch, you press select on the NES controller and you end up doing a significantly more powerful punch, as I'm sure you could imagine. The goal of the game is to work your way up from being the smallest and most pathetic boxer in the entire NES cartridge to eventually defeating Mike Tyson, which is easier said than done. There are 23 total matches separated into 4 circuits. Some of the fighters do show up more than once, but they're always much more powerful the second time around, and luckily all the characters in this game are kinda cool for the most part, so I've never personally minded any of them repeating. But I mean, I'm sure there's that one guy. Now that we're all caught up on what Punch-Out is, at least I hope, we can get to talking about what makes the game so great. Of course, gameplay this and gameplay that, but I mean, I just explained how the game works, so unless you want me to sit here for 10 minutes explaining how a rhythm game in the form of a boxing game is fun, I'm just gonna tell you to check it out for yourself. Claiming the game is a rhythm game in the form of a boxing game is a little demeaning, I will admit, because, well, technically isn't every game a rhythm game in disguise as something else? Like, you're always just pressing buttons at the right time for video games. But despite all of that, Punch-Out is fun not only because of its well-polished, amazing, and smooth gameplay, but also because of how much variety it has. I've played this game over the course of my entire life, and as a kid, one of the most memorable things other than the boxers themselves were the beautiful colors that each of the stages had. You would think that making the floor of the ring, which covers the majority of the screen, one singular color would be lazy and tacky, but it's the opposite. Well, the opposite of tacky at least. The colors they use are not only all top tier colors, but since the floor changes as you progress through the circuits, it adds meaning to these colors, which is more important than a lot of people think. Pretty colors are one of my favorite things in both video games and just in general, but a lot of people go wrong using colors when they just add a bunch of pretty ones with no purpose other than being pretty. That kind of thing is great for art, but when you're designing a video game, and especially one that has an adventure-like progression of the story, then you're going to want your colors to have as much significance as possible. Of course, I probably didn't describe that in the best possible way, but this kind of thing isn't easy to articulate on. As a kid, getting to the aquamarine floor as opposed to looking at a blue one for the past several hours not only felt like heaven itself, but also may have psychologically affected my brain permanently because that color is still one of my favorites to this day. But enough bullying all the colorblind people of this channel. There are a ton of amazing features and aspects of Mike Tyson's very own Punch-Out besides the pretty colors with meaning. The most memorable part of the entire game are the fighters you have to face as Little Mac. Some of them are definitely inappropriate stereotypes, as every YouTuber since 2010 has pointed out, but as a kid, I didn't even notice and thought all of them were cool and scary anyway. Though I mean, come on, this game was made in Japan. Why does Piston Honda have a quote that just says sushi, kamikaze, Fujiyama, nipponichi? But I mean, if Japan could put that in their very own game, then I'm sure you can skip past all of these horribly offensive quotes the game possesses. In all seriousness though, all of the characters are unique, memorable, and cool. The first fighter you face is Glass Joe, which obviously is a pun on Glass Jaw, and I shouldn't have to say that, but there's been way too many times people were shocked after hearing me say that. So if you didn't know that, you're welcome, I guess. Glass Joe's boxing record is 1-99, as in 1 win and 99 losses. After playing against him, you're probably gonna wonder what bozo could have possibly lost to Mr. Joe over here, but canonically, it's the final boss of Super Punch-Out! This giant anime guy! They say it was a freak accident, so maybe the anime dude pulled a muscle beating up the man or something. After Glass Joe is Von Kaiser, who, believe it or not, is German. He's also easy to fight, but more importantly, he has an epic handlebar mustache. Piston Honda challenges you next, but despite his racist tweets from back in the day, the only thing I ever noticed was how huge he was, especially compared to the other two guys. This is where the game starts to get kinda difficult, but anyone who's played this game more than a few times will tell you that the first Piston Honda fight isn't hard. Once Piston Honda is defeated, the floor changes to an even more beautiful color as you have to face Don Flamenco. Never in my entire life have I understood why this guy comes after Piston Honda, because his fight is infinitely easier. And look at him. But just in case somehow he's too hard, there's a trick to pretty much knock him down instantly. After him is my favorite and probably everyone else's favorite opponent also, which is King Hippo. I mean, look at this guy, what's not to love? Well, if you've never played Punch-Out before and run into this guy, then a lot. At first, it seems like Mans is literally invincible because none of your punches do any damage. But for the 3 people who have never played, I'll let you in on a little secret. There are a few frames where his mouth is open and you just gotta pop him in the mouth. Somehow, this will make his pants fall down, which somehow makes his belly vulnerable to your attacks. A little ridiculous, but perfect for a video game villain if you're asking me. Next up is Great Tiger, or as I like to call him, the OK Tiger. He's definitely hard when you play him for the first time, but once you learn his pattern, he's super easy, and there's also a secret to beat him in one cycle and get a bunch of star punches. After him is Bald Bull, and this is where the game really starts to get difficult as the room for error significantly decreases from this point on. Bald Bull also has a signature attack where he charges at you like a bull, and it just kills you if you don't know what to do. But since you're watching this video, you're about to know what to do. Just punch him in the tummy right before he hits you. I promise it's really easy, trust me. Piston Honda comes back, but this time much harder, followed by a character named Soda Popinski. In the arcade version, his name was Vodka Drunkinski, which I thought was funny. Now, some people would consider this to be a rude Russian stereotype, but this was 1987, so if they wanted to do a rude Russian stereotype, they would have called him Chester Kasparov or something. After him, both Bald Bull and Don Flamenco come back, followed by a man named Mr. Sandman. He later ended up becoming the final boss of Punch-Out for the Wii for some reason, despite him being only the 3rd hardest boss on the NES. From Mr. Sandman onward, I consider this game to be in the very difficult levels, but luckily I've developed my Rinnegan in real life and I have to rotoscope my eyes in every single video to look normal, but regardless, I of course have no trouble with this and can keep up with any movements thrown at me. Up next is Super Duper Macho Man. Other than this weird spinning tornado punch thing, I don't have much to say about him other than the fact that he's much easier than Mike Tyson. Who's up next? Mike Tyson is easily the hardest boss on the entire NES console. Well, unless you have a Rinnegan like me. The amount of time you have to react to his attacks is sometimes literally a mere frame or two. Despite the game being out for over 30 years now, 99% of people who have played this game haven't defeated Mike Tyson, and that's a generous estimation. Nowadays, the Yoshi mains of the internet would leave their nasty deodorantless crevices to complain about it being unfair, but for the real gamers out there, this is one of the most rewarding challenges in video game history because there is nothing like defeating Mike Tyson from Mike Tyson's very own Punch-Out. Mike Tyson went on to bite a man's ear off of his head, and with Nintendo's family-friendly reputation, they obviously couldn't keep that man on the cover of their game, so Punch-Out devolved into a mere ownerless Punch-Out, and the final boss was changed into the worst boxer of all time, Mr. Dream. I'm not even going to talk about Mr. Dream because I'm sick right now and he makes me want to barf, but I do want to talk about how Punch-Out still stands as one of the best sports video games of all time to this day. Obviously, sports video games are generally rushed and not very polished, so I'm sure the comments aren't going to be telling me about how I forgot about NHL 08 for the PS2 or something. At least I hope. But there are obviously a ton of other really good sports games. But what makes Punch-Out stand out isn't just how it's both polished and fun, but because of how unique and memorable every single fight in the game is. Not one single person in the history of the world has played Punch-Out and been like, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. Because you physically can't. The game's just too memorable. Modern sports games seem to be going more towards an accurate simulation of the sport as opposed to a fun game version of the sport, which is fine of course, but I think they're missing the point. The entire point of sports, not even video games, but straight up sports is to have fun. So when you make a video game version of a sport, you want the video game to also be fun, and it should be common sense that playing basketball in real life isn't going to transfer seamlessly to video game form. That's not to say modern sports games are bad or anything. I myself enjoy 2K and NCAA football, but Punch-Out is straight up more fun. Nintendo are the masters of making games fun, so when they set their goal to make a fun game out of the fun sport of boxing on the NES of all things, they had to get creative. In doing so, they made one of the most fun games on the entire NES library. And while this isn't as accurate to boxing as some of the newer games, it's certainly way more fun because what Nintendo did achieve much more accurately was the fun of boxing. Obviously, I don't expect all of you to agree, but this game is definitely amazing and you all need to check it out. Also, Mario is the dang referee, what more could you ask for? Sports video games in general are something that quote-unquote real gamers seem to always be at war with for some reason, but Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is the perfect combination of the actual sport and the fun of playing video games. And if you don't believe me, look at George Foreman's boxing on the Super Nintendo. It's horrible!